Hello, I'm Porter Squires, and I'm going to be doing the week 2 tutorial session for Game Builders Club. In this tutorial, we're going to be going over hitboxes and getting the player to punch an enemy and getting the enemy to punch a player so we can get that basic interaction. Last time, we went over the basics and we created a moving player, and so this time we'll be actually getting some interaction. Uh, I made some notes here just for the sake of getting a list down. And oh, sorry, before I forget, the recording didn't work for the actual in-person session. So I'm just going to be doing this from now on. I'm going to be recording a video outside of the session and then posting it later. I'd already recorded this video, but I have to re-record it because there was a bug with my OBS. I figured it out. Apparently, I was accidentally muting myself with a keybind. So I have disabled that, and hopefully I don't end up muting myself again. I'm going to power through this, though. So, first off, we're on week 1 branch. Let's branch off so we can do week 1, 2 demo, and I already have one. So I'm going to do demo 2. And we will create a branch off of week 1. I will bring my changes to this new branch, keep my notes. Also, I added a sprite sheet to asset supplements, so we will merge that in. This sprite sheet is for the new enemy idle animation that I added, so we can actually get some pictures for that. Let's open up Unity, and we can see just basically what we have so far. Just a player running around, and they move around. Let's fix this up a little bit. So notice when we move, the player doesn't switch directions. If we wanted to, we could use the scale value right here to flip them. If we make it negative, it ends up flipping them the other way. So -1 will look good, and 1 looks good. So let's real quick in the player controller, we can in move, whenever velocity.x is less than 0, we'll be going left. So we can make a check right here. It can either be direction or velocity. It'll give you the same thing, so we can say direction.x2. Make that if statement. We can set the scale to -1 since we're going the other way. And to do that, I would like to do transform.localscale.x equal -1. This doesn't work because of how accessing the x value works. To do this, we need to store that variable. So we can say scale equals transform.localscale. Then we can change the x value of this vector we saved. And then we can set it equal to this vector after changing it. The reason it doesn't work is because we can either get or set this variable right here, which is a struct, similar to a class that has variables, but we can't get or set what's inside of it. And so we have to just set the whole thing. So that's how we flip it, and then we can create the same thing for if direction.x is greater than 0, that way we can set it back. And it's going to be the same thing except +1. So we can go back to play to make sure it works. Perfect. We are running the correct way. And we can probably slow down the player just a little bit. Something like 7, so they don't run so fast. Okay, now we want to punch. And I have this checklist of things that I'm going to do. I'm going to store this in the tutorial notes folder for week 1, 2 notes. First, we need the animation to punch. If we go to the animator, we have a few things. We have blocking, idle, run. We need to add a punch. Oh no, there's a cockroach on my wall. 1 second. All right. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. Uh, we are we have these animations. We have to make the punch animation, so we can real quick do that again, similar to the last ones. Selecting the player, you go down here, create a new clip. Under animations, Y1 punch. And then, oops, that is not meant to go there. Sprites, characters, Y1. Under Y1 punch powered. There's two right here, so this is just Y1 punch. This is Y1 punch powered. The Y1 punch powered has a special effect around the hand, which is what we're going to want. We can use this one later, but this one looks a little bit better. So drag that in, and then drag the window down so we can see the scene. Play looks good. We want to slow that down so we can make sample rate 12. If you don't see the sample rate, by the way, this little three dots right here, show sample rate is the check for that. After changing the sample rate, looks good. Maybe a little bit slow. We can change that later if we want. Now that we've made the animation, it shows up here. We're going to want the same thing as blocking. So we are going to want a trigger. So punch. And then we're going to want a transition when that triggers between both. So right here, hit the plus, condition, punch. No exit time, and we want 0 duration, that way just instant. And then for the back, we want 100% of the punch animation play, and then after that, instant. And then that will be good. Now that we have that, let's add a little bit more to the punch. So if we, right here, create empty, we can create a punch object right here, and this will add the punch effect. So I have another sprite that I want to add right here, and it's this right here, the punch effect. It adds a big burst on top of the normal punch so that we can actually see a better display of what we're punching. So we can make another sprite right here, and then in this animation, we can add a property under punch, which is the child, sprite render, sprite, and then I'm going to drag this up here. We can drag these sprites right here. And notice, I think there's, how many is that right here? 7 sprites right here, and then for this animation, there's 8. So we're going to need to offset it by 1, because I know that this is the end. So we can drag that up, make it start at 1, right there. So we have these 7, drag that back down, and now it's changing this. So if we drag it, nice, we get a much cooler punch going on. And we're using this sub, or this child right here. So now that we have the punch, let me see what's next. Yeah, we need a button to activate it. So we will need a method in player controller. We're going to use the same parameters this one right here. So we can say public void punch input action dot callback context ctxt standing for context. And we'll say anim.setTrigger, since we made a trigger variable called punch to activate that animation. And then to make use of this context variable, this gives us access to context that started. This is a boolean that's true if you are pressing, like the frame that you press the button. Immediately when you press it, this is true. So if we want to set this trigger only once, we can say if context.started, and then put this in that if statement. So in the frame that you press a button, it'll set the trigger. Go back to the editor, and we can add under the player input events right here. We can do fire, since that's the click button, or that's the mouse click, sorry. Player controller, punch. Now we should be able to punch. And notice that I can click as I'm running, and it won't go until I stop. That is because in the animator, we only have a transition from idle to punch. So we need to make a transition right here too. We can do the same thing, 0 duration, no exit time, and on punch. And then the transition back will actually take care of the transition back to here for us, because if we're running, it'll immediately transition down here. So that'll take care of itself once it's done. Go back to scene. Make sure we can punch while running. That looks kind of weird. Maybe I want to stop the player when we punch. We can do a check over here. And instead of setting the velocity in the move, we need to set the velocity with consideration for are we punching or not. So in the fixed update method, we can do this. And instead of setting the velocity right here, we can set a target velocity. So we can store a variable. This is what we're going to move if we're not punching. So we're going to say target velocity. And I'm only serializing this so that we can see it. I'm not actually going to change this, but instead of setting velocity here, we do target velocity. And then if we just wanted to behave like it does now, we could just say rb.velocity equals target velocity. But we only want to do this if we are not punching. To figure out if we're punching, we can access the animator and check the current state. So if we do anim.get current animator state info, that is a big method, and then it expects one parameter, which is the layer index. We can say 0. And I'll just show you, there's layers in the animator. Right now we're using the base layer. That's where this stuff is on. We could just leave it 0. This is the 0th layer. We're probably not going to add more layers unless we need more complicated blending. We can worry about that later. If you were ever passing in a layer right here, you could just say 0 and you're good. So we get the current animator state info. This gets us a variable animator state info. And then we can call a method isName and then pass a string in here. If it's wise1punch, wise1punch, if that is the current state, then this will return true, which means we're punching. So if we are punching, rb.velocity equals 0. We don't want to be moving. Otherwise, we can set our velocity to our target. And that will ideally keep us from moving while we are punching. And then we can hit play, test it out, make sure it works. Nice. It stops us while we're moving, which is good. And if we want to do that for blocking, for example, I forget if we have a button working for blocking, but if we wanted to add something else that stops us during blocking, we can just add an or statement and copy this and change this like wise1block. And if you had a bunch of states that you wanted to stop during, you would just add a bunch of or statements here. You could probably make a method just to organize that, make it a little bit easier. But yeah, that's how to check the current state, and you can use this for a bunch of different things. It's just up to you how creative you get. So, now that we have the punching working how we want to, let's move on. No punching while moving, correct. Let's make a collider. So, to actually punch stuff, we need some sort of hitbox. We need to figure out if stuff is overlapping. We can use the physics system for that. So on this punch object right here, we can make, and I'm not putting it on player just because we have a lot of stuff here. I like separating it, that way it's easier to find stuff. we can make a collider, a box collider 2D. That'll just be a square, and 2D because 2D game. And this collider, if we hit this little check right here, we can see where it is. I don't see it. That's because the size is really small. I don't know why I did that. Set it to 1. If we hit this button right here, we can get these little boxes that we can drag around to edit the collider. And just to make sure we have the collider looking nice, let's go to the punch. And then let's go to where it's the biggest right here. We can drag the collider so that it matches up to that right there. So that'll work well. That'll be nice. And if you want to change the size right here, you can. You can offset it right here, or just manually do that. Now that we have the actual collider, let's check right here is trigger. This is important because we don't actually want this to act as like something like an extension of the player as a collider. So like when we walk forward, we don't want to stop when the right side hits something. We want to use this as a box to check for things. So we're going to use is trigger, which will not make it behave as a normal collider. So we won't run into walls with this, but it will give us access to on trigger enter, exit, and stay. To use that, we will need to make a method. And I'm just going to double check I am doing the right thing right here. So create C# script. We'll say player hit box. In this script, let's delete this stuff. We can use on trigger enter 2D. This method will be used by default if you have a collider with is trigger, which is why we set it. This collision variable, whenever a collider moves into this hitbox, this will be called, and it will give us collision. Collision gives us access to the game object. So we can say collision.gameObject. And we can get the name of it. So for now, let's just say debug.log collided with, and then add that right there, just to test it. And then let's add another object here. We get a 2D object, square. We'll call this enemy. Move it over here. And then we will also add a collider over here. This will not be checked as trigger. And then we'll also need a rigid body. Whenever you have a collider, you need a rigid body in order for it to be calculated or for it to be detected whenever you overlap. We didn't add rigid body for this one because we already have one in player and it's attached to the player object, so we don't need that. We do need it right here though. Remember to set gravity scale to 0 because this is not a platformer. And then hit play. And then we'll see when we move close enough, it should tell us that it's overlapping, but it's not. I wonder why it's doing that. Oh, I forgot something very simple. I needed to add this script right there. Now it'll work. I forgot to add the script that actually calls the function to it. Move right there, and we get collided with enemy whenever we move so that it overlaps. Cool. Now, let's actually make it do something. But notice that the hitbox for a punch always works. We only want it to work when we're punching. So we can use the animation for the punching, and we can enable this collider only during certain frames. So we can say, when do we start? Like right here on frame 3, we can have the collider disabled beforehand, and then hit record, and then we can check it, frame 3, move to wherever we think we should remove it. So like, let's say right here, we can stop the collider, uncheck it, and then stop recording. So it'll be off until this frame, it'll be on during these frames, and so if the square moves onto this collider while it's active, then it will work. So let's play and just double check that. I'll open the console. Bam, it works. Collided with enemy. Perfect. Okay. Now, we want it to make it do something. Let's first make an enemy script so we can give this thing some health. That way we can actually see if we're damaging it. So we can say enemy. I'm actually going to put this in a folder just to make this a little bit more organized. Enemy, and it will recompile again, but that's fine. Yeah, it's recompiling. So in the enemy script, add a value, health. We'll just set it to 100 for now. And then we can make a method over here to damage it. Float damage. Health minus equal damage, and then we'll just debug.log, print the current health. Health of enemy is health. So whenever we damage it, we'll be able to see that. Let's go back. Actually, in our player hitbox, we want to use this enemy script now. So assuming enemy has the script, let me add that before I forget, then we should be able to get it with collision. So we can do collision.getComponent enemy, and this will give us the enemy component, and we can call damage from there. The issue is, when we collide sometimes, we won't be colliding with an object that has the enemy script. So we want to check for it. To do this, we can instead do try get component. Instead of the enemy script, this returns true, and it returns the enemy script as in the form of an out parameter. So we can say out enemy enemy. It expects this parameter right here. The out keyword means that this variable you create right here will be changed inside of this method. And so if tryGetComponent returns true, then it will set enemy to be the enemy component that it successfully got. If tryGetComponent returns false, then enemy will be null. So we can say if tryGetComponent, and if this is true, enemy will be set. So we can say enemy.damage. And then we can create a variable up here for how much damage we want to do. We'll say 50 for now. Or, sorry, damage. Pass in the damage. And then that should call the damage method an enemy whenever we overlap like that. So just go back and test. Right here. Perfect. Enemy 50, 0, negative 50, 100. It should be dead by now. Let's add that to the script in enemy. So if health is less than or equal to 0, we use this method destroy. What destroy does is it just removes any component or game object we pass in from the game. And we want to pass in game object. The reason we're not passing in this is because if we pass in this, it will destroy the enemy component attached to this game object, not the game object itself. That'll leave the sprite renderer up, so we want to destroy the game object with everything on it. So destroy game object if health is less than or equal to 0. Go back, and we can check to make sure that works. Run over here, punch, punch, dead. It's gone. Perfect. So we got that hitbox working. That's great. let's do the same thing for the enemy, but first, let's make the enemy a little bit cooler. So we are going to add the sprite sheet as an animation. So I have in monsters, I only have one sprite sheet right here. This is the Micronor, whatever I named it. It is a octopus thing. So let's add an animation to the enemy right here. We can say create, and then in the animations folder, I'm just going to add a subfolder, Micronor. I'll add Micronor idle. And then I'll drag this up here and drag these over here. Hit play, and it is idling. Let's change the sample rate. That looks a lot better. Now we have a weird octopus looking thing. So to get this thing to actually hit us, we have an idle. We need an attack now. So first, let me double check I'm doing this in the right order. Yes, okay. So let's add something like the punch, the hitbox. Let's add, oh, first, before I do that, it just went back to this. Let's set the default sprite right there. There we go, now it looks nice. We'll just create a circle for now, because I don't actually have an animation for this guy to attack yet. So we will just create a circle, and he's facing this way. I'll put this over here, make this like red or something. And then let's make another animation for this guy. We'll name it Micronor attack. And then in this, we'll hit record. Actually, don't hit record yet. I'm gonna disable the sprite render, and I'll actually add a collider, circle collider right here, and I'll disable that too. So they're disabled by default. And then let's say frame 5 in attack, we can enable these. That way the sprite render and the circle collider are enabled at the same time. And then at frame, let's say 8, 6, 7, 8, we'll disable that. So we can just uncheck those. And then if we want the animation to last a little bit longer, like the attack, and we want to wait a little bit, go up to like frame 13, and you don't need to record anymore. We can hit this little button right here. It says add keyframe, and this will add just a blank keyframe. If you wanted to, you could also just hit Control C right here and Control V, and that will copy what you have previously. I'll hit Control Z though, because a blank keyframe I think is just better. So now hit play. It does an attack. We can change the sample rate so it matches the time we have. Alright, now we got that. Let's also, let me make sure I'm doing the right thing. So we add a collider for the circle. We want to, like the other one, check is trigger. And we want to follow the same steps we did for the player hitbox. So instead of a player hitbox, we can make an enemy hitbox right here. And it will follow basically the same structure as the player hitbox. So we can just copy paste this. And then the only thing we need to change is enemy. We can change that to player controller to try and get the player controller script of whatever we collide with. And we can call player.damage. That method doesn't exist, so let's real quick make that in player. And to do that, we'll need some health. Float health equal 100. Then scroll down here, public void damage. Pass in some damage, health minus equal damage. Player health is state the current health. There we go. Got the player hit, or the enemy hitbox working now. Then, sorry, I have my cat on my desk. She's getting in the way. All right. We have the script to actually attack. That's on triggers, so we can add the script right here. That way when this goes over the player, it'll damage. And then let's make it so that that animation actually plays. To do that, we need transition in the animator for the enemy. We can do the same thing we did in the player, make some transitions, make a parameter trigger, we'll say attack, transition 2, the trigger for attack, duration 0, and then transition back, exit time 1, instant duration. And then in the enemy script, we should get access to the animator. And then an easy way, if you forget to ever set the value in the animator, like over here, if you forget to set anim and player controller, what you can do is in the awake function, you can say if not anim, which is just a shortcut for saying anim equal null. So if it's not set, you can say anim equal get components animator, and that will search the game object that this is attached to and check for an animator component. So that'll set animator for us. So now that we have the animator, let's just make the octopus attack all the time for now. We can say anim.set trigger, set trigger attack, and now every frame it'll just start attacking. Let's go back. Object reference not set, not sure. Don't think that's, what is that referring to? Let me double click this. That, I have no idea what that is referring to. Oh, right here. We're getting an error in the animator. I don't know why it's doing this. That is unusual. I'm gonna close that window for now. Let's see if reopening it works. Yeah, we're good. Okay, that was a weird error. It happens sometimes though. Let's hit play, and the octopus should be attacking constantly. We're getting an error still. That's weird. But yeah, it is attacking. Let's go over there and see, does it, it is not, it's not hitting us, which is weird. I wonder why that is. Oh, I forgot, we don't even have a collider on our player. We need to make a collider for our player. So let's add a capsule collider. And we can just change the sizes right here. Drag this over here. Perfect. Nice and tight around the player. Let's hit play again, and it should be hitting us. Oh, oh no, we pushed it away. So, two things happened there. First, we pushed it away. We don't want that to happen. Next, we are rotating, and we don't want that to happen. Let's real quick, to fix that rotation, under rigid body 2D, under constraints, freeze rotation, make sure that is checked. We'll do that in the enemy too. And then I just want to real quick make sure that the collision is working before we start working on this other stuff. Perfect. It is detecting collision like it should. Player health is going down. All right. So now we don't want that to happen. To do that, we don't want the enemy and the player to collide, but we want the punch to collide with enemy, and we want the circle to collide with player. To do this, we can use layers, and layers allow us to divide objects into groups that we want to check collision with. So if you go in the inspector, top right here, you can click this drop down for layer and then go to add layer. I'm just gonna make 3 layers just so I can sort things out nice and easily. So we can have player, enemy, and hitbox. So we can use these 3 layers and assign player to player. And it will ask you if you want to change the children. That'll just assign punch to the layer we're assigning to player. No, I want to only do this object, and I want to assign punch to hitbox. And then for enemy, we can also assign enemy, no, this object only, and then circle will be also hitbox. Then to actually make the layers behave in the way I described, right now, assigning them to different layers doesn't do anything because I haven't changed any settings for these layers. I will still run into this guy, push him away. So if you go to edit and then objects, project settings, there's 2 tabs here. There's physics and physics 2D. Physics is for 3D. You get this matrix down here. Physics 2D, you need to hit this tab over here to access the layer collision matrix. This matrix enables collision between each of these layers right here. So for example, this top left box, the column right here is hitbox, and the row right here is default. So this check will mean that collision is enabled between hitbox and default layer. If we don't want, for example, the player and enemy to collide, we find wherever player intersects enemy right here. So the enemy column and player row, we can uncheck that, and then we shouldn't collide with the octopus because we are on layers that don't agree. There we go. And then we can see because the punch is on hitbox and that still, or circle right here is on hitbox, they're both on that. They both collide with player and enemy still, so we still get the collision detection. Now that we've got the attack working for the Micronor, let's actually have it move towards us. So, first thing we need to do is actually make it move. Let's edit the enemy script, and then in fixed update we can do this. We can say, well, first we need to get a target. So we need to get access to the player controller position. So let's store that up here. We're going to store the player controller. We name it target. And we can do the same thing right here. If target is null, if we forget to assign it, we can say target equal, and it's not a component. It is a random object in the scene. So we can use this method find object of type, and then pass in player controller, and it will search the scene for an object with this component. If there's more than one object, it will give you the first one you find. So you typically only want to use this for objects that you know there's going to be one of. So we can say find object of type player controller. That'll store a target for us. Now we can get the difference between the position of the player and our position. So vector3 difference equals target dot transform dot position minus transform dot position, and that gets the this dot transform. But we don't need to say this, we can just say transform. Then to get the speed that we're going, let's store a speed variable up here so we can customize that. Float speed equal 5, or actually one that's slower than the player, so let's say 3. We can say RB, let's say velocity is equal to difference, and then let's get the normalized version of this. So that'll say with a magnitude of 1, and then we can multiply it by speed. And that will create a vector pointed towards the player with a magnitude equal to our speed. Then we say RB, keep forgetting, I don't have RB assigned yet, so we can do the same thing as animator right here. Say rigid body 2D, RB, then if not RB, we can use that shortcut, get component rigid body 2D. say RB dot velocity equals velocity. There we go. Now it'll move towards us. And we can just double check that. Actually, let's implement the flipping thing right now. So if velocity dot x is less than 0, because this will be relevant for this guy too, because he hits in front of him. We can actually just copy paste what we have for the player right here, just to make this easy. Oops. And then instead of direction, we can just substitute velocity right here. And then that will flip depending on which direction we're going. So now that we have that working, let's just run it and test it to make sure it works. Perfect. It is moving towards us, and it is attacking. Let's make it so that it only does one of those. So if it gets close enough, it'll stop moving and attack. Otherwise, it'll keep moving towards us. So let's add a attack distance threshold. We can set that equal to like 1.1. That's probably good. And then instead, we can say this difference. We can say if difference dot magnitude, that'll get us the length of the difference, is greater than attack distance threshold. We can do everything we did right here. Otherwise, we can not move, so set velocity equal to 0, and then we can set the attack trigger right there. And then this is a lot to have in one method. If you wanted to, you could divide this into multiple methods, but I won't do that for now, just to make it so, because we don't need to. Actually, no, I will. It's bad practice to put a bunch of stuff in the fixed update, just because you'll end up putting a lot in here. So we will say move and attack. And we'll just put this in here. And so if we want to move and attack, we can just put this in fixed update. It's very good to format it like this because, for example, if your game is paused, let's say you have a bool paused and you set it somewhere, we'll just set it equal to false. You can say if not paused, move and attack. Otherwise, you can, oops, I accidentally hit the insert key, move and attack. And you can use this for easy access to actually controlling things rather than nesting it in giant if statements. For now, we'll leave that. Proper tabbing. Okay, there we go. So let's make sure our move works. Oh no, I accidentally did something. Oh, that is a mistake. So if I have a float value, that is a decimal number. I'm assigning it to a decimal number, but it automatically reads decimal numbers as doubles. Doubles have more accuracy than floats. If you are typing a float, you should type F. That will assign the decimal number to be a float. That is important to forget. It will warn you about it, which is easy. And you can just double click on the error and that will bring you straight to it. But we shouldn't have that error anymore. So we can hit play. And what did we forget? I don't know what it is. I have no idea what these errors are. I'm gonna be honest. It looks like it's working properly. It is damaging us and it's moving towards us and it stops. So that's working well enough for me. And it is not. There we go. Now it's doing the idle animation. So if we run away far enough, we're good. Now let's punch it. and we're good. Kill the enemy. So yeah, that is. I'm probably gonna restart my editor, and that will fix whatever this error is. But that is all I have for this tutorial. So we covered the colliders and hitboxes, went through everything in this note. The enemy moves towards us and it attacks. Hopefully we'll have a better animation to actually run the attack. But for now, that is what it is. And yeah, I will be recording all of these videos outside of the tutorial sessions from now on. And so during the tutorial sessions, I will just be doing an in-person demo. The next one will be October 18th, Sanford Hall, 7 p.m., room 112. So we're going to be covering UI based on request. So we will be covering the health bar, XP bar, any other indicators you might need. In this scenario for this game, we will have a charge meter. So if you block an enemy's attack, you can build up a charge and then punch powerfully. That's why we have the powerful punch and the normal punch. So we will create that UI next time. And if you have any other questions, please let me know before the other tutorials. That way I can cover them in the next tutorials. So yeah, thank you for watching and see you.